In today's episode, we're getting lessons from Amazon on how to turn your organization into a digital leader. From EngageMint, I'm David Millay, and this is Flip the Switch. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Flip the Switch, where we sit down with leaders in customer experience and employee experience, and we try to figure out what are the trends that they're paying attention to, what are the experiments that they're running, what are the principles that have driven success for them throughout their career. We take all those insights and we apply them in the world of sports and entertainment and live events. Now, today's episode, I am super excited because we are going to be sitting down with John Rossman. So who is John? Well, for one, he is one of my favorite authors and thought leaders in the space of digital innovation and business disruption. But John's background, he was a former Amazon executive. And at Amazon, he was responsible for the launching and scaling of the merchant integration team. And he played a key role in launching and scaling the Amazon marketplace business, which is now over 50% of all units sold at Amazon.com. He was also responsible for the enterprise services business with responsibilities for Toys R Us, Target.com, NBA.com, and other great brands. So I first came across John because he wrote my favorite business book that I read last year, which was Think Like Amazon, 50 and a Half Ideas to Become a Digital Leader. He's written 3 books on kind of the mindset and some of the things that Amazon does behind the scenes. One of them was author of Amazon Way on IoT, Internet of Things, 10 Principles for Every Leader from the world's leading Internet of Things strategies. And another book that we are going to spend the majority of time talking about that he wrote was The Amazon Way, Amazon's 14 Leadership Principles. Now, you are going to see right from the jump, the way that John is able to unpack core principles and adapt and apply them to businesses and organizations of all size is really incredible. And it's why the book that he wrote that I read last year was one of my favorites, because I really felt like it wasn't just business fluff. It wasn't just leadership fluff. There were really tangible tactics and strategies that I could take away from reading his book. And you're going to see when we talk with him, there are going to be tons of things that you are going to take away. So get out your pen and paper for this one. You're going to be taking notes. And I won't steal any more thunder. That said, let's jump into this episode with John Rossman. John, welcome to the show.
David, nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me.
I am so excited to jump into this episode with you. And I think I wrote this to you in my initial email that you wrote probably my favorite book from last year that I read, which was Think Like Amazon, 50 and a Half Ideas to Become a Digital Leader. It is just one of the most chock full of applicable strategies and tactics books that I've ever read on business. And so we had to have you on the show, but I know it's not the only book that you've read. So why don't we start there? Talk to us a little bit about some of the books talk to us about some of the books you've written and kind of what those entail. I know they serve different purposes.
Yeah, for sure. So I had the opportunity, I was an early leader at Amazon. So I was there from early 2002 through late 2005. I got to launch the marketplace business, which today is about 58% of all units shipped and sold are kind of through third-party sellers. So it was that platform. And then I also ran enterprise services. So had responsibility for running the e-commerce channels for Target, Toys R Us, Marks & Spencer, a bunch of other great brands. And when I left Amazon in late 2005, I started to put to work all these little tricks and strategies and maneuvers. I was a partner at a consulting firm, and one of my clients at the Gates Foundation pulled me aside. This is like 6 years after I'd left Amazon. I'm like, man, you do a nice job of putting all these little strategies to work for us, and everything, right? You're not preaching about Amazon. It's more about like, hey, here's some things you can learn. And so he said, like, look, you got to write a book about this. And the smartest thing I ever did was talk him into being my partner on the books. And so, so I've written 3 books, as you said. The bestseller is called The Amazon Way, Amazon's Leadership Principles. And it's really kind of my story at Amazon and the story of the leadership principles. It's a nice, quick read. The second one is Think Like Amazon, 50 and a Half Ideas to Become a Digital Leader. That's the full playbook. If you think about it, like that's the full playbook of all the mechanisms, all the strategies, neatly, easily bundled up into discrete ideas so you can kind of pick and choose them. I really do think about it of like an offensive playbook. Like you can run that one, you can run that one, you can run that one. And then I wrote a book called The Amazon Way on IoT. And that book is for business people to understand how they might incorporate the Internet of Things, which is about putting sensors that embedded into customer experiences and embedded into your business, and to help business people understand the opportunity for how the Internet of Things might be able to impact their business. And so those are kind of the three books that each serve a slightly different purpose. But, I always say, like, this is never about Amazon. This is about you and how you perform, how you compete, how you do both short-term and long-term, create an environment for success. And so that's what I love to do, is how I primarily help businesses figure out how to compete in the digital era.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that because I want to dispel one of the first myths that, or first objections that our listeners might have on the show, which is I don't have Amazon's budget. I got 300 employees and I got a lot of people counting on me, and I can barely get to answering my emails. How the heck do you expect me to act like Amazon? They've got all the money and people in the world. How do you come back from that objection?
So when I was at Amazon in early 2002 through late 2005, the company, you might remember, you may not remember this, but it was referred to as Amazon.bomb, Amazon.con, Amazon.org, Amazon.toast, right? So we were being doubted to our very value proposition, whether we were sustainable. The stock was, at $5 a share. But I can tell you, like, Bezos and the leadership team, they acted exactly as they act today. Like they were confident in the business. They saw the metrics. We were doing the right things, and we were being authentic about what our brand was, which was about building customer trust. Now, we couldn't place as many bets back then, right? That's really the only difference, was we couldn't place as many bets as they can place today. But how they went about thinking about the details of the business, how they thought about leadership, how we worked hard to clarify what the potential for the future was, and then pick our choices carefully. Those
Mm.
are things that you can do as an individual. Those are things you can do as a team. Those are things you can do as a business, regardless of your size. So I really, I hear that objection a lot. Like I don't believe in the premise. I think that's either a misunderstanding or an excuse for not being thoughtful about how you operate as a business.
It is interesting too. I mean, so my background, I spent about 6 years with Disney Institute, where we were helping other organizations understand Disney best practices. And it wasn't about saying this is Disney, this is Disney. A lot of it was how do we apply and adapt first core principles. And I think that is something that is really misunderstood with these really successful large organizations, is that people that have never worked for those organizations think, oh, well, it's just because they've got a lot of money and that's why they're successful. When in reality, it's we're able to scale because everybody's operating according to a same consistent set of standards, methodologies, mindsets, principles, heuristics, and frameworks. And I think that's what you do really, really good job of in the book, is calling out and codifying some of those things that you guys did at Amazon. So I want to jump. I'm excited to jump into these, and I'm sure that we could talk for hours with how much I love your books. But let's start here. I want to answer some kind of sports specific questions, if you will. I think for us specifically in the sports and entertainment world, what we tend to see is we see a handful of leading organizations really paving the way. But then for the most part, you've got a lot of people that are really kind of risk averse, if you will. And when you think about the words digital leader, most of them would look and say, well, that's not us. We'll let somebody else take those risks. So one of my questions is, how might you think about becoming a digital leader if your primary revenue stream has always been based around live events? Like, how do you kind of think about that?
Yeah. So digital transformation, or being a digital leader, you have to think about, I think there's kind of five primary venues or lens in which you go, well, how do I improve the business through applying digital frameworks, new ways of acting, right? So it's through the customer experience, it's through the employee experience, it's through your operations, it's through your value proposition, and then it's through your business models. And I think each one of those has opportunities. I would say universally for any business. So I think we could go through a sporting program or an entertainment team and go, "Well, God, how could we improve the fan or the employee experience? How could we improve the employee experience? How could we improve back office operations? How could we create a better value proposition? How could we create a new business model?" So, an interesting one. I think it's still a little bit um, far out there, but it's definitely impacting the entertainment world, is this topic of NFTs, right? So non-fungible tokens, it's a crypto enabled thing, but really what it is it's a collectible, right? Like that's the easiest way to think about it, as a collectible. And what really cool brands are doing, and elite um, personalities are doing, is they're creating NFTs that are tied to kind of their moments and their brand. I think those are really early opportunities, but I think every organization is going to have an opportunity, especially one that's made up of fandom. And that, don't forget, like, that word is from fanatic, right? Like, people are irrational about stuff, and that's awesome. But find ways to drive connection to those true fans. And there's tons of mechanisms you can do that with. And that's just on the fan experience, right? Then let's go through all those other lenses and figure out new ways of either being more efficient, taking friction out, delivering better quality, or delivering new experiences. That's what business is about. That's what any business is about.
No question. I think you can dive really deep into any of those 5 areas and start to figure out, okay, how can we really be digital first in these areas? And how can we use digital as a tool to help us enhance those connections and our goals in each of those areas? Go ahead.
The other thing about being digital, is one part is about all these different experiences and different models, but the other part is really about um, how do you act as an organization? And I think interestingly enough, I boil the essence of being digital down into two primary, like, athletic attributes, right? And those two attributes that I focus in on are speed and agility. If you think about what speed is in an athlete, it's about a repetitive, efficient motion, right? Highly predictable, highly efficient. Well, that's operational excellence in an organization, right? How do you use these approaches to become more operationally excellent? The other attribute sounds similar, but it's distinctly different, is agility, right? Agility is the ability to sense and make change happen, to adjust, right? But you also have to have awareness. So how do you put more awareness and the ability to adapt within an organization? A lot of that's about experimentation and trying small things and then adjusting along the way. Too many organizations are not sensing, and they're not placing small bets. When they do something, they go all in. Well, that's not the agile approach to how you develop. And so being digital is both about reinventing all of those types of attributes and capabilities, but it's also about recognizing we can be better at operational excellence, and we can be better at how we change as a core capability in our organization.
If you are listening to this and you're like, holy cow, my mind just kind of got blown. I was going through notes prior to this, reading back my underlines in your books, and that exact point around the difference between speed and agility. The clarity in which you're able to communicate those differences is really important, because it dictates then your actions based on those things. And it's not just general, well, let's get better, right? I think by really dialing down, you can start to create clear actions from there.
And it really is, like, people think that those are the same thing. They're distinctly different management playbooks, right? One's a pretty traditional management science, operational excellence, but you can take it to new degrees. And the other is much more of an innovation mindset. How do we actually innovate? Those are two different management sciences. And I think that's part of the awareness that's coming up, is like, oh, I have to be both a world-class operator and I have to be a systematic innovator.
And yeah, and they're different things.
Right.
Well, let's talk about this. We've started alluding to, well, not alluding to, we've started talking about how this is really not about budget and size. It's about a mindset and frameworks and the way that you work. And you, in the Amazon way, Amazon's 14 leadership principles, you really highlight kind of the 14 principles that drive every business unit at Amazon. And so I want to kind of highlight a few of those and go deep on a few. But maybe start us off with what are those 14, and then we can pick and choose which ones we go deep on.
Sure. So, the interesting thing is when I was at Amazon, these 14 leadership principles were codified. That happened a couple of years after I left.
Interesting.
But we were practicing them every single day. Like we were figuring out like, well, how do we make decisions? How do we hold each other accountable? What do we prioritize? What's our long-term actions and our short-term actions? And those are the things that came out of leadership principle. And I think the powerful thing that Amazon and Bezos recognize is that your principles have to be, they have to be at a level where you can actually make choices and you can make actions and you can evaluate things that you're doing on an everyday basis. It can't just be aspirational kind of poster on a wall.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Moments. And so, not that these are the right 14, now 16 leadership principles for anybody else. That's not my proposition. My underlying proposition is the clarity, the intentionality, the practice that they put into these principles and that they try to live them. They're not perfect. They make mistakes all the time, right? But they aspire to live up to these principles. That is the underlying thing that I think any organization would be better at really figuring out what do we truly believe in and how do we tie actions to those beliefs in everyday moments.
If you're listening to this, John's about to go through those 14 leadership principles and what they are. But if you've never seen them before, you might be surprised at the way that they're framed up. They're not your classic, to John's point, integrity, respect, transparency. I mean, that they really inspire action. Whereas a lot of times when we're working with clients, I mean, we tend to see this vagueness because we want to be aspirational. It's like, yeah, but that's not actually inspiring action. Great that you got those words on the wall and they look good on a poster, but how are people acting differently as a result of them? And that's what these principles do.
Yeah. So, well, I won't read through all 14. I'll read maybe just a couple. And the key is not just the headline on the principle, but it's the paragraph underneath the principle are some real hidden nuggets, right? So the first and the most famous is customer obsession. Leaders start with the customer and work backwards. They work vigorously to earn and keep customer trust. Although leaders pay attention to competitors, they obsess over customers. That's great. In a lot of ways, the mistake a lot of organizations that I work with make is they go, well, it's all about customer obsession. It's like, no. That's just one of 14. It's the most famous. It's probably the first among equals, but you can't just optimize on customer obsession. Let's read another one. It's called Are Right a Lot. Leaders are right a lot. They have strong judgment and good instincts. They seek diverse perspectives and work to disconfirm their beliefs. I think that second sentence there, they work to disconfirm their beliefs, is an absolute like championship habit, right? Like what most of us do, and most of us are surrounded with people who have common beliefs, and it's like living in an echo chamber, right? In that you're just confirming what you actually believe. Great leaders make specific choices about how to bring in alternate points of view. And it's not that you always adopt them. It's that you're listening. And so you're figuring out, how do I learn really from opposite points of view? And I think if we all did that, both in business and in life in general, like you'd have more empathy, you'd be learning more, and you'd figure out like, okay, how do I continue to adapt? If you look at the true long-term championship coaches out there, what do? They adapt, and everything, right? They aren't stuck in their way, and they do that by listening to alternate points of view. So I think that's a super powerful one. Another one that I love is, let's call it bias for action. Speed matters in business. Many decisions and actions are reversible and do not need extensive study. We value calculated risk taking. So that's really about like, how do we make decisions, right? And the fact is that understand what most organizations do and most people do, especially in bigger organizations, is they get comfortable, like any real decision, like I'm gonna bring it to the center, I'm gonna escalate it, I want to CYA, all of this stuff. It's like speed matters, and we want to empower leaders to make smart decisions. But it's really understanding, well, not all decisions are the same, right? Amazon has a simple framework for this leadership principle. It's called one-way doors versus two-way doors. One-way door decisions are decisions that are hard or impossible to reverse. What do you need to do in those decisions? Well, you need to bring those to the center. You need to slow down. You need to talk about it more. Most decisions are actually two-way door decisions, right? If you make it, you can actually reverse it. It might cost you a little bit, but it really doesn't cost you a lot. And what most people do is they're not creative. They create situations that at their basis look like a one-way door decision, but you could actually break it down into smaller steps and smaller two-way door decisions. And so understanding that pace of progress is the critical competitive factor, and that testing things out is the way that we truly learn versus guessing at what's going to happen. So that's a really important one. And then the last one that I'll read here is called Have Backbone, Disagree and Commit. Leaders are obligated to respectfully challenge decisions when they disagree, even when doing so is uncomfortable or exhausting. Leaders have conviction and are tenacious. They do not compromise for the sake of social cohesion. Once a decision is determined, they commit wholly. And so that's all about, you have to play your cards at the table. We have authentic, point-driven decisions where all we're debating is what's the best thing to do. People bring their points of view. They lead with customer obsession and data, and you don't hold back. But we respect decision makers. And so when we recognize what decision we're making, who is the decision maker? And when that person has gone through the right process of getting that feedback, they make a decision. And we all commit to leaning in to making that decision successful, because we knew, hey, we had the moment for that decision. But again, if you make most decisions a smaller decision, like, hey, if we're making the wrong decision, we're going to be able to adjust from it, right? And so you can see there's connection between these leadership principles and the way that they work together. So those are a few of the leadership principles. Again, I think the power is not just in the headline, but it's in the underlying paragraph of that leadership principle. I didn't write these leadership principles. I want to be, I've had people like, oh, John, you wrote no. I really just paid attention in class, right? I learned a ton, and I saw the power of how to, with wisdom, apply these leadership principles for the right purpose at the right moment. And it's a big playbook, right? There's 16 leadership principles now at Amazon. You have to know the right ones to apply at the right moment. You can actually do a lot of damage by applying a leadership principle without the right intent or in the wrong moment. And so you have to really understand the full playbook.
If you're listening to this, hopefully, you're hearing exactly what we said, and that these are designed to inspire action and not just be words that look great on a poster. They really are set up. And that's where that paragraph underneath that clarifies the value or the principle is what makes it so important, because it actually says, here's the action and the behavior we're expecting from our leaders. And it's so important to creating culture, is that clarity and that roadmap and that path and setting that expectation. John, let's, if you will, unpack a couple that were really, it's kind of stood out to us. I want to start with customer obsession, because obviously at EngageMint, that's what we do a lot of, is helping organizations connect with fans emotionally, connect with customers. So this customer obsession is important for us, but for a customer, or for our clients as well. There's a line in here in some of your writing, and that says, the best customer service is no customer service, because the best experience happens when the customer never has to ask for help at all. How did you kind of come to understand the areas a customer might need help with? And talk a little bit about that line and that concept, that mindset.
Yeah, and I think it's still kind of counterintuitive, but your customers don't really want to talk with you. What they want is the outcome of whatever product or service that they are acquiring from you, right? And so the way that you see these opportunities is by understanding the customer questions, the customer comments, and the negative moments that happen in any business, right? Like there's always something that goes wrong. And so you have to really have an eye, and you create your eye by following your metrics and by talking to your customers, and your non-customers, and really understanding, like, what are the moments of friction? I really think that this concept of friction is the biggest opportunity for most businesses. And friction is all the little things that we kind of ask our customers or our employees or our agents to do in order to get something right, in order to accomplish the mission. And I really think Amazon's now like 27, 28-year history is just a continuous reduction of friction in their business about helping the customer discover and get the product that they want. Customers don't want to deal with and understand fulfillment and all these things and payments and logins and everything. And Amazon has just continuously, in small ways, reduced the friction of like, I need something, I get something, right? Like they've just made that easier and easier and easier over time. Every business has the opportunity of developing a sharp eye and attunement to what are the little points of friction, the negative moments. We always talked about like a bad day, right? Too many companies, they're always focused on like, oh, what's the normal experience or what's the typical experience? No. Focus in on the negative experience. Like, what is a bad day? What's a bad experience? And how do we eliminate those? And if you eliminate the bad ones, it raises the bar even on the good ones, right? And it tends to be, and we all know this is like, 2% negative experiences can spoil the entire brand and the entire reputation of a capability. And so that's really where the opportunity is. And so develop a sharp eye, and then you have to be willing to take action. You have to get to the root cause and reduce how that friction happens. But what most of us do is we just get, I called it in the book, I borrowed a line from Pink Floyd, which is you get comfortably numb with it, right? Like, yep, this is just the way it works, right? Like, yeah, there's always this action somebody has to take, or that issue happens, or we ask them to do this. You become numb because you don't pay attention to the details.
That happens to us nonstop in the sports world, where, someone's been in an organization for 20 years and, well, it's just this infrastructure issue that we have. This parking lot is the way it is, and we can't do anything about it. That's how it is. We've tried in the past,
or
you come numb to the friction,
or this policy, or this little handoff, or this confusion. Exactly.
But to your point, and that is a theme that our loyal listeners will know, is that yes, while you definitely want to create those wow moments, a lot of times in the moments that matter in a customer journey, you're really reducing friction, and that is the easiest way and most bang for your buck in terms of how to enhance the customer experience. Identify those points of friction and make improvements.
And as an organization, if you do that well, you're developing the habit of paying attention and improving something. And so you can build on that assets into a lot of bigger moments than like, okay, some bigger capabilities. And so it both improves the customer experience, and improves your operations, and you build an organization, habit or gene that's like, we pay attention to details, right? And we know how to fix problems.
Well, let's talk a little bit about another aspect of customer obsession here that I think is a symbol that I think is really cool, that helps set the mindset. You reference that a chair would oftentimes be left empty in a meeting, and it's saying that is the voice of the customer. That empty chair is where our customer would be sitting. Talk to us a little bit about that and the impact that had. Would that chair take on different personas? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Practice.
So that was what we would call a mechanism at Amazon, right? And so a mechanism is, you have a principle about like, customer obsession or diving deep or something like that. It's like, well, what's the little trick? What's the little technique we do to actually force that or enable that principle to come alive? So the empty chair was a mechanism that helped to remind a meeting or a group that customers not here. It's everybody's job here to deeply understand and to deeply care about who the customer is and what their experience is, and kind of what went wrong, like what was that bad moment. It's not somebody else's job to understand that. That's everybody's job. And so that's an example of, you have to take these principles and kind of that paragraph, and then you have to figure out what are some ways we build habits, right? Especially if you're doing something new. Like, think about when you're learning a new skill, you have to slow it down. You have to over index on the isolated movement, the isolated play, the isolated habit. And you really have to create a reminder to develop the habit. That's what these mechanisms do, is they help actually develop the habit within the organization. Everything about these leadership principles is about how do you actually put them into play. They're not disconnected from everyday actions. And so an empty chair, to me, the power of that isn't like, oh, actually having an empty chair and it's customer reception. It's the underlying point is, find mechanisms to put your beliefs and your priorities into everybody's job and into everybody's actions.
Something that's interesting for us that I see, and this is just my point of view on things, is when we are working with clients sometimes on the sports and entertainment side, and we're working with the front office, a lot of times this mechanism, if you will, seems fluffy or frou-frou or unnecessary. And so we have traditional leaders that may be unwilling to put that into place. But what they don't realize is the power that has. And as I'm thinking about it right now, I'm like, it's kind of ironic, because when you think about what a coach does on the field, a coach, and you have two sons that played water polo in college. And I mean, coaching, it's full of mechanisms to get them to remember the core principles that they're trying to drive home with their athletes.
And you have to, keep the plays, simple. You have to develop them over time, and you have to make it real. And so it becomes kind of second habit, right? In those moments of truth, right? And so that's absolutely right.
Let's talk about another piece, and last bit on customer obsession. Then I want to move into some of the other leadership principles. But you had a saying here, or a line here that's great, which is, Amazon Prime is a loyalty program that doesn't feel like you're using one. So how do you advise an organization to start a loyalty program? What should they be offering if they're trying to think about how to reward their most loyal fans?
The best advice I'd have on that is, I'll steal a line from Jeff Bezos, who I steal a lot of lines from. But his line about Prime was, I want to make a customer feel irresponsible to not be a Prime member. And so I think if you think about your loyalty program and make the value proposition of it so outrageous that you can't call yourself a fan if you're not part of this loyalty program, I think that's a different mindset and a better mindset versus kind of, we do these incremental little things. And as a customer, you're debating, do I really want to give them my email address to get this little piece of value? If a customer is doing that type of mental calculus in their head, you haven't really created a value proposition. It should be like, of course I'm going to join your loyalty program. So you have to really think about the real value proposition behind your loyalty program and make it irresponsible for your customers to not be part of it.
So many good, just like little mind tricks, and like just that saying right there of make it irresponsible for people not to join, just totally shifts it and says, oh, well, we should be adding this, we should be adding that, we should be adding this. And it puts you in a value creation mindset. I love it.
And one of the little economic things you have to do behind that is, you really have to, instead of measuring, the profitability or the revenue of just this one moment, you have to look at the customer lifetime value, right? And so you have to have both your short-term metrics and financial value, but you also have to be looking at the long term. And there's a lot of interesting tools out there. Customer lifetime value is one of them that really helps you understand it's not just about this order or this event. It's really about the lifetime value of that customer. And that helps you from a financial standpoint, rationalize enriching the value proposition of your loyalty program.
Beautiful. Well, let's go into dive deep. Let's dive deep into the dive deep principle. So I think it is leadership principle number 12. It's just dive deep. Um, Talk to us a little bit about that. And I've got a few specific questions, but I'd love to know more about when we say dive deep as a leadership principle, what are we really trying to say?
Yeah. So I'll read the paragraph behind it, which is always important. So leaders operate at all levels, stay connected to the details, audit frequently, and are skeptical when their metrics and anecdotes differ. No task is beneath them. Wow, there's a lot, packed in there. A couple of things that I see good leaders not doing that is part of that is this audit frequently basis. So one of the things you get is like, God, well, how can I really understand the details of my business and still get everything done and everything? And I also want to empower my team. Well, there's two primary mechanisms to do this with. One is your metrics, and your metrics have to be designed to zero in on the problems and the noise versus what most companies do is they design their metrics to essentially pat themselves on the back, right? Like, we're doing great on this. We're doing great on this. You have to design your metrics to find the problems. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is this audit frequently standpoint, right? Like you got to pick random moments to go dive deep, go walk the halls, go be a fan, go, talk to the end customers. And it's amazing. This is the, what do they call it? The ivory tower that so many people, senior people live in. They don't go do those walkarounds. And that's essentially the audit frequently. And that then ties into the piece of being skeptical when metrics and anecdotes different. So if your metrics are saying like, everything's great, everything's great, everything's great, but you go talk to frontline workers or go see the actual customer experience or what's happening. If those two things aren't in complete unison, always trust the anecdote, always trust what you see is actually happening out in the field, and then figure out what is it about our metrics that is not picking up on the reality of what I'm seeing. But what most leaders do is they define, well, metrics look good, metrics look good, metrics look good,
Right.
until there's some, big flare up or big issue, or customers just get tired and slowly start leaving.
I was really proud this week when we were talking with one of our listeners who we've been in discussions with doing work with their organization for a long time, and we were talking about office redesign, and they were short on space, and he was the first one to stand up and say, you know what? I don't need to sit in this senior leader wing with everybody else. I'm going to go sit with my team. I'll free that office up because I want to be plugged in and be able to dive deep and be a resource for them. But I want to see what's actually going on. I don't want to just get the report anymore. I want to actually see it. And to your point, I mean, that diving deep, marrying the stats, the quantitative data with the qualitative data, and over indexing on the qualitative. I mean, it's great.
I know it's kind of a corny show, but there's a good learning lesson to it. Undercover boss, right? Part of the
Yeah.
problem if you're the senior person is people recognize you're the senior person, right? And so things get dealt with a little differently and everything. How do you go undercover? Like, how do you really understand what's going on out there in the moments when they don't think you're around? Again, slightly different mindset. Most people aren't willing to do it. Like, hey, go figure out what it's really like. Not for you as the senior person where things get set up a little differently. Go undercover.
Well, let's talk a little bit on the dive deep aspect around kind of Amazon's annual planning process. It's 2 months long, and something I want to hit on too is like this difference between PowerPoints and presenting it via that way versus building this 6 to 8 page narrative. That's something that I've seen a lot of in terms of it being public. That Jeff doesn't like to do PowerPoints. He likes deep dive written pieces of homework almost that leaders have. Talk to us about this little annual planning process and maybe kind of why PowerPoints are frowned
Yeah.
upon.
So, the goal of planning is to really think through where are we currently at? What should we strive to achieve? And what's holding us back? Like, what are the actions we have to take in order to get there? And to have lively debate and to be able to capture it make careful choices relative to, essentially resource allocation, because you can't do it all and everything, right? And what most organizations are unwilling to do is the hard work of truly understanding the current state, right? They don't want to have those moments of truth. They don't want to really admit where they're at. They don't really put in the time to, like, well, what are the reasonable stretch goals that we want to have? And then what are the paths? What are the things we have to do to get that? And then capture that in detail and then talk about it time and time again, right? Like, you can't do a plan in one conversation. And so this habit of writing, so these narratives, future press releases, frequently asked questions, all of those are mechanisms in order to help the organization take their time. These are kind of stoic habits, right? Of slowing down, really thinking about where we're at, where do we want to get to, and how do we get there, and then rationalizing those decisions together. And so that's the mechanisms that they've put in place in order, whether it's their operating plans or their innovation projects, they all go through this process of writing. And I go into some detail in the books about that process of writing, but that's the underlying spirit of taking the time to really think it through and debate it. And what most of us do is like, yeah, here's the quick step, here's our quick plan, and move on. That's what conversations tend to be like. It's like, these are the most important moments in your business. Don't cheat your brand. Don't cheat your future. Do the hard work to actually think it through.
Yeah, I mean, and I think on that note too, right there is a lot of the way that y'all used to run meetings is shaped kind of how I think about meetings now too, where I go into too many meetings with clients where we might sit in. I mean, it doesn't even need to be with clients. I mean, you got a lot of friends and whatnot. You hear about their meetings, and it's very, very common to hear that, oh, that could have been an email, right? And I think the way that y'all at Amazon prepped for meetings, the way that Amazon would really force you to sit down, write it out, hash it out, it led to, okay, all of our thoughts have been written down. This meeting where we come together is about discussion. It's not about head nods saying, going around the room, does anybody have anything? Nope, we're all good. This meeting is about dissecting and really hashing out the ideas that have been written up. And it really is it's a mechanism for mindset.
Right. And then capturing whatever, like, you learn by debating the memo or whatever, then creating the next iteration of the memo, and then going, well, are we done, or do we need to do that again? That's why it's such hard work, is because it's hard to predict exactly how many cycles it's going to take to really have the cohesive clarity, vision that, okay, yes, this is the plan we want to commit to. This is our recommendation. And we have thoroughly thought this through, and we all are there. And then you present it to senior management. And as you mentioned, meetings at Amazon start with 15 to 20 minutes of silence, phones down, computers put away, where senior leaders are reading, like, they're deeply understanding these concepts. They get their moments to edit or add a point of clarity, and then they can decide, are we doing this? Are we doing plan A, option B, option C? Like, where are we putting our resources? They can make really good strategic decisions. And then when they do make a decision to proceed on something, they're so much further down the path of understanding how they're going to execute, because they've done all this hard work up front. It's definitely what I would call a go slow to go fast approach. And that's why it really takes an understanding of, that's the most, you feel like you're taking too much time, but you're really not.
My last question on diving deep relates to kind of going slow to go fast, which is really kind of around this understanding what's achievable, what's a stretch area for us. I mean, really, how should organizations think about growth opportunities, not limiting themselves to just thinking about what they can do? How did you guys balance that?
There definitely are kind of like must achieve goals and results, and then kind of the aspirational goals. And I think the key is really understanding maybe the slight difference between those two. And then, especially on the aspirational ones, focus more on the inputs. Like, what are we going to do in order to achieve this result than actually, defining the result. Too many people are like, oh, we want to grow by 100% or whatever, but they're not clear about, well, what do we think the inputs, what are the controllable things we need to do in order to get there? We may not get there this year, we may get there next year, but if we focus on the controllable inputs versus the uncontrollable outputs, you're going to be you're going to achieve more no matter what you achieve at the end of the day.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Well, John, what have we not covered that we want to leave people with as we start to wind down here? What are some other aspects that you think, hey, if you're a leader at a sports and entertainment organization, this is really an important piece of information for you to know?
Well, you've done a good job of running me through a lot of the aspects here. I think that's hard. I think it's really about, the 14th leadership principle is called deliver results. And it talks about some of the things we just talked about, but it also sets high expectations that you should expect a lot out of your organization. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, I think that is the best people will clamor to be in organizations where they're expected to deliver a lot. And I think that in life, in business, you should have high standards, you should have high expectations, and you should be willing to admit and embrace that. And I see too many teams, too many organizations who are not willing to aspire enough and say that is our expectation and actually mean it.
I shouldn't have asked this question because now I'm ready to go deep with like three more, but there's something in here as well around having unreasonably high standards. And that's something that you almost pride yourself on, or that Amazon prides themselves on, is having unreasonably high standards. And that's almost seen as like a good thing. But I guess my follow-up question would be, what happens in the organization if you don't achieve results? How is that kind of failure treated? When is it okay to fail on some of those results? And I guess talk to us a little bit about what happens when you don't live up to those unreasonably high standards.
Now you're getting into just what I would consider kind of really delicate, or, the graduate level aspect on these leadership principles, because that is the one leadership principle where I see the most damage potentially being done. And it really is about understanding uncontrollable outputs versus controllable inputs. Sometimes you don't get the outputs that you want, but the question is, did you do everything within reason in order to get that? You should be measured to the things that are within your control. And did you do everything reasonable relative to your controllable inputs? Outputs by design, by nature, like you don't always, you're not typically in control of that. And what happens is you don't do the planning, you don't do the goal setting, you don't do the measurement. And then at the end of the day, you don't get the result you want. And it's like, you're not sure if it's like, is it because we didn't do the right inputs, which people should be held accountable for and they can grow from? Or is it just like, these are the outputs and we didn't get the outputs we want? So you're not set up to actually learn from that. And you're not set up to coach people, give them feedback and understand, like, do I just have the right person in the wrong role, or what do I need to do to support them better? Or what do they need to do to grow? And so if you don't have that understanding, it's just a really complex situation at that point.
All of these principles tie in so well together. And I even think about the concept between controllable inputs, uncontrollable. How did you frame it again? What was it?
Uncontrollable outputs, right?
Uncontrollable outputs. So controllable inputs versus uncontrollable outputs. That concept is great. And then I think too, there's so much that we could go into around, how Jeff would hold people accountable. I think there was a line where he went off on somebody and everybody smiled after he walked out of the room and were like, that's how you know he likes you. He wouldn't have gone into you and held you accountable.
Well, that story was at my expense and everything, but and there's a really good framework out there to help on this kind of objectives versus, inputs and everything. It's called OKRs, objectives and key results. It's a key book, Measure What Matters by John Doerr, which is one of my favorite books and everything. I think that book and that framework of OKRs is a good mechanism to help do this better and everything.
Yeah, and I think that that's just an interesting difference and something to call out if if you're listening and you want to go deeper. Definitely a significant difference between OKRs and KPIs, and it's really kind of in the specificity of them, which comes first. I don't know if we'll put links in the show notes to that, but anyway, feel free to go do your Googling and do some research. Maybe Katie, let's Google and find some articles on differences between OKRs and KPIs. I don't want people to get those confused, but OKRs are a really powerful concept for driving work. All right, John, let's wrap up here. Where can people reach you? Where can they buy the books so that they can learn more and dive into this and your thoughts? Where can people follow along the journey? Give us all the handles.
The books are available at Amazon in paperback, in Kindle, in Audible, and everything. You can find me on LinkedIn, John Rossman, and I have a newsletter that's for free called the Digital Leader Newsletter. You can go to Substack, or if you just Google the Digital Leader Newsletter, you'll be able to find it. And I do a weekly little story to help strategists and innovators at their practice and everything.
For those of you listening, I would highly, highly, highly suggest going and looking at the email. I subscribe to a buttload of email newsletters, and I've only been subscribed to it for a short period of time. But in that short period of time, I found it tremendously valuable. Again, hit your inbox free, and that's like an easy way to learn more. But again, I go buy the books. It's so worth it. So, John, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Any last words for our audience?
Prep for this and everything, and so you really did your homework. I appreciate everything you brought to this.
That's Katie on our team too. I mean, she does a hell of a job helping prep me and get me ready for these things. So, John, appreciate the time, and to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Hey guys, before you head out, just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That helps more of your peers find the show as they search for ways to get better in their own roles. But this podcast is just a small part of what we do at EngageMint. In our normal day in the office, we're crazy focused on helping athletic departments and sports and entertainment companies generate more revenue by becoming more customer-centric. To see how we might be able to help your organization, visit engagementpartners.com to learn more. Download a free guide, check out our blogs and case studies, or schedule a call with us if you want to see how we can help with your particular objectives. Our goal is to help you create deeper connections with fans and generate more revenue. So when you're with us, hopefully you find a nugget or two that helps your cause.